we've set the pitch for this week, which is the way of attainment. Now, this is a path which many people find very difficult to understand, because the more the attainment, the more the problems. The more difficult it is for the soul to find its own special level, then it seems as if we're faced with all sorts of contradictions in values, and the whole area becomes conflicted in different ways that we weren't even aware of before. But this, I think most of you are well aware. The opening of the soul to new awareness must bring contradiction if it's going to do any good at all, because our old way of living and thinking and being has been very negative, and therefore we need this new conflict in a way. We need this new impetus into the consciousness of our life. But until this really takes over, so to speak, a new aspect or a new dimension, we're not changing much from what we were before. Seems a strange use to use conflict for progression. But that's really what it amounts to, is because we have to stir up these various valuations which we've unfortunately created, not only from ourselves but from other resources, with the result that our own category, our own identity and individuality takes such a long time to emerge until we begin to know the real self. These are waiting periods of development, but during these times the initiate will go through all the trials and errors and tribulations. But I think we can take it for granted that most of you have or are coming through that stage of conflict and beginning to visualize this way of some other sort of peace, some other sort of state, beside just the conflict and chaos which has stirred up the whole debris of our past and trying to launch it into a new conscious future. Here then the way becomes not only straight and narrow, but very demanding. This needs a much deeper appreciation, because we live many lives in one. We're not living one life at a given time. We are living many lives and several lives. This means that what we usually used to call reincarnation is incarnation. And that is all the various experiences that we've lived in and through our past are constantly coming up again as each life unfolds itself. So much of what our problems are really historical more than they are immediate. And for this reason, each life that pours itself into another brings not only its problems, but a lot of its blessings and a lot of strength too. And this we notice that the character of the mind and the character of the individual has certain qualities of stability that they bring over from other places. So continuity is really the sign of attainment, not in any given way or even by looking backwards, but by a sense of consciousness in itself. Brain consciousness, which is what we're usually accustomed to, is pretty shallow. It doesn't go deep. It's only really allied to the seven senses, the seven principles, but it hasn't really dug up any depth within the consciousness. So let us look at these various attributes. When we say conflict, we should really use the word contradiction. I've used words that our strength is our weakness and our weakness is our strength. Now, these are things we must look at. The strength are those things we're good at and come easy and require little effort. Hereditary things and things which we haven't really worked for, where they've been presented to us from other sources, other people. The type of naturally being good and naturally being good-tempered. This sort of carry on, if you like, from other conditions which we haven't had to create within ourselves. So our strengths are really a part of that ego which seeks to enjoy life by its own inflation. That we should inflate the best part in ourselves and over-enjoy them or over-express or overuse them may at first seem rather quaint. But personality and the qualities in which we have can be very overpowering, very demanding, and can become selfish. A good pianist can scorn the learner, and a good teacher may be very annoyed to teach in the primary school. And those of us who've got on the path a little may sort of rather scorn the primitive pieces that we've come through. A slight sense of superiority, you know, which gradually creeps into our good thinking. And if we're not very careful, they can become not only selfish, but detrimental. This especially applies to the personality. A person with a good, strong personality, well backed up by confidence and breeding and culture and good relationships, these people seldom really understand the pattern of compassion. To them, life is all righteous and judgment. And this self-complacency in which they are all right and other people are wrong. They go to church, they go through the motions, they pay their rates and taxes. But they're really not big people at all. They're just living out that part of the qualities within themselves of which they haven't really done much about. But those parts of the nature which are the hidden recesses of character, these I think are important. These are the things we try to run away from, we try to hide from. These are our inferiorities, the complexes, the phobias, the fears, the uncertainties, and also that sort of sense of successes and failures, all these things which go on behind the backcloth of success. Here, I think, is the real workshop. This is the way attainment will go, not through the successes and the triumphs and those parts of our nature which are already strong. We should proceed through the weak part of our nature, the soft part of it, the part which hurts most, the part which needs developing and strengthening, and that part of us which can unfold itself from its latent past and present itself for education, for training to the initiate. It seems rather a contradiction that it's our sins that make us whole, not all our confessions of piousness. We're not looking now on sin as a morality, but we're looking on it as an experience. Because what is sin but trial and error in the field of experience, in direct association? And until we do know what these contradictions and what they are, it's impossible for us to get into evaluation. So let's remove then the sense of guilt-shame and see that life experience is a direct involvement. We must go through all these various areas of pain and achievement. You don't achieve a good set of muscles by sitting in an armchair. You've got to go out and meet life and develop them in the very marketplace of living. So where before we've rather looked at all the good virtues as the things which will take us to heaven, let's reverse this a bit and let's say it's the bad things that's going to get us there much quicker. Now these are the things which we need to work on, to develop, to value. These are the latent forces. These are the talents which are waiting for unfolding. These are the hidden qualities, buried rather too deep in the personalities. These are really the workshops. And this, I think, is where we should take a joy. When they come up to the surface, we look at this thing and say, did I have this? Did I say that? Did I do this? And there is almost a sort of sense of guilt that it even existed. But every one of us has this deep well of unknown quantities. We all have a lot of hidden history in us. We also are involved very much in development of the character of the undermined and of those awaiting forces which have had to take a back seat while the other ones have been having a good time. So now let's look on the sins and the shames and the guilts as building material. This is the stuff that saints are made of. Not made out of singing hymns and chanting and getting sort of housemaids neat. It isn't really that sort of sainthood we're after. We're after the person who's prepared to look into their own heart and mind and spirit, and what they find there they won't like, but they're going to do something about it. The hasty temper, the quick word, the critical judgment, righteousness, which I think is worse for them all. And so we can go through all the opposite or negative values of the virtues, and here we find the stepping stones. Now, these are the areas of attainment. Now, these are the ways by which the soul will achieve and carve its own history into a new strength and into a new endurance. This doesn't mean that we've got to go out and commit every crime in the book. We no need to do that, because whatever in us we've already got. We no need to find any more. We've been on the road a long time now. We've been coming in and out of many lives, and we are history. We are the events of past, present and future all working out in this very complex and exciting personality which we're wearing now. Because personalities are suits of clothes, the sorts of masks in which each life adorns itself and forms itself into some veneer which we present to the world and we think is us. So then let's look at the part of the characters. Perhaps the weak people are the great people. Weak perhaps in some ways, but powerful in others. I often think when I see people struggling with this part of their nature that these are the brave people. We can all be brave with what we're good at. We can all be strong to what's easy in us. And we can all be righteous when we're so-called good. But can we enter into the valleys and the shadows of people's sufferings and really feel and see in them and in ourselves a sort of reflection of the same struggle, the same crisis, the same need, the same hunger? This is a sort of reflection of understanding. And here I think we put to ourselves all the things which have gone against us, we begin to use as material in which to understand other people. An understanding which perhaps has only come through the conflict of the lesser nature, something that's only been achieved through the apparent sins of the world, something which has only been obtained through going right into the underworld of our nature and looking at the whole lot of it with a new eye, a new vision. I always remember a friend of mine who was a sort of a connoisseur. He was always hunting out works of art. And one day he was visiting a house and something was said about the attic, and he had an absolute treasure for attics. He couldn't resist them. Give him an attic and he was up there in no time at all. And he seemed to have unearthed a lot of treasures. And I know on this particular one he went up and he stood in this great dusty barn of a place, and he looked round and he gasped. He said, "This is as good as the British Museum. Here is treasure," and so on. And they all thought it was a whole load of dump, you know. But gradually, as with his experience and skill, he picked up this old rocking chair, and he looked at a piece of silverware and an old picture hanging on the wall, and gradually all that old rubbish began to take on a new value. He explained where it came from, the period it started from, and the rubbish room was really the treasure chest of the whole house. And so it was all brought down and dusted and polished, and some of it was sold and the family treasures put right, and there was rejoicing in the house. I'm not so sure there isn't a sort of biblical story in this somewhere, because we've all got these sort of rubbish dipped. We've all got these attics, unfinished, places we rarely go into, and perhaps sometimes if an experience makes us go into these places, and we unearth some treasure we never knew we got. some heritage which had lain unused for many lives and centuries perhaps, in which these untold pieces of work, arts and treasures, almost long since forgotten, were waiting for the light of day, waiting for the moment to be recognized and brought out and to adorn the consciousness, to adorn the house, and to bring new values into it. So your own attics at house may not be much good, but we have them in the memories here, the deep memories of the continuity of consciousness. We've been living a much longer time than Tudor and Queen Anne. We've been at it long before Bird and Seer started. We were right amongst the Druids and the early things, and perhaps in other civilizations and other continents. We are really beautiful antiques, you know. And we've been going quite a bit. And for that reason, we must have a lot of useful, beautiful rubbish in the attic if we can only find a way of getting the valuer, somebody who understands these things, to point out in our own self what we thought was a negative piece suddenly becomes a treasure of great price. And here it is then, the way of attainment is through this degree of exposure suffering, where it makes us dig into the personality and quest the motive, and to see in a new light all the strange things that we've done and learnt and haven't done. And it brings a new sort of vision to them. And instead of them becoming guilts and shames and all that sort of thing, we see them as the exposure to the experience of God. That is the deep need for every life to be exposed like a negative to the light. And there in the darks and the shades and the values and the tones, you see beauty that you never saw before. So be grateful for all your negative things. Be happy for every one of your failures. And every part of the nature which you're not pleased about, that is the stepping stones to better and greater things. And once we can see that the way to glory is not through the steps of fame and ambition and success, they are up through that slow back passageway of the whole years of the creation, evolution, through karma, through opportunity, through natural growth. And once we begin to see that the way to God is through the area of experience, then this is certainly the stepping stones to the great state of the I Am. Talk this over amongst yourselves when you're talking to people. Try and put this over to them. Look here, unless you make mistakes, you're not going to be any good to anyone. Unless you fall down as many times as we all have, you'll never learn the skill of getting up. Unless you've walked onto the very brink of life and death, we don't really know what life and death is all about. And until we meet our own Gethsemane and our own field of Calvary, who are we to understand the language of the suffering and those who've lost their way? So not only is it an attainment in the personality and the releasing of the deep potential, it gives us communication. And this perhaps is the most important thing of it all. For human relations and spiritual communications depend on this great wealth by which mind, soul and spirit can communicate. And this it can do in the silence of the night, in the cry of a tear, in the ache of a back, in the sadness of loneliness, and in the moment of despair, and in that moment of need. These are the moments when the spirit breaks through that pall of ignorance and darkness and reaches right into the consciousness. And the light at that moment is lit, which will never, never go out again. So now we must reverse all our values and look at the consciousness of evolution through the growth of experience, and shed from ourselves all these artificial guilt, shames, moralities, and get healthy-minded and broad and generous and deep, and let the Spirit itself have the opportunity to enter into the dark places of our soul and really and honestly do some work. So now let us have a prayer meditation here. the far-off days of the long ago, as the soul was sent forth from the very heart of time, from the celestial center of its eternal birth. Sent forth not to the call of bugles, but slipped forth quietly in the space and the depth of a night. And there it merged into the shadows of its coming to find its own pathway into the very galaxies of eternal things. And with each one was a band of the holy ones. With each soul was a family of God. And with each there's a living part of an outpouring of the great crystal clearness of heaven. Souls being born into the consciousness of all consciousness, life itself. Let us then continue our journey through the shadows of the outer world, past the bright and the dim stars, through the very milky ways of many things, and slowly be drawn into the planets of our incarnating, there to be ensouled in each case in special ways, that which was within us, the seed of perfection, should be exposed to the plant of truth. Ensouled many times in planetary beings, passing from system and parent to parent, handed on by the great family of God into the great void of experience, yet deep in the heart of happiness. A soul well born and a soul well tried, one that has gone out and met the battles of its existence, that has walked upon the very precipice of decision, and has learnt the independence and the qualities of survival and that consistency of inward knowing. We then are these travellers in space. It is to us that we have been and come and still will come and go, yielding only to that which is of the need, purifying, cleansing, strengthening the unused part of each life, and bringing it to the center of our being, that it may be borne aloft as a new treasure. Heaven then is our ultimate, for we are heaven and we are earth. We are space and we are time, and we are born into the infinite. There is no escape, nor should there be, for we are part of the great family of the gods, moving into the time sequence where we shall live and love and suffer in the heat and the cold of a day, and yet find the comfort of the prayer at night. Thus, through our weaknesses, we climb the spiral staircase into that celestial storehouse of inward knowing, and there to find in the quietness of that lonely minute the shine of gold and the outline of the great culture of mind, and from the lowliness of the spirit find a treasure of courage we never knew. This then is our attainment as we pass from star to star, and parent to parent, and place to place. An eternal pilgrimage filled with the promise that all things will be made new, and we ourselves being created and recreated into new forms, new patterns, new visions. Such is the gift of the gods to the gods' children, that we may prosper in our need, suffer in courage, strength in our weaknesses, and vision to our failing sight. For these are the stepping stones to the treasure chest of God within us. And let this be always to the fore of memory and mind, that by these things we shall enter the kingdom of heaven, and with no other.